My name is Joseph Sperandio. I was born in Glen Carbon, Illinois, and I'm 97 years old. I was born in 1925. They came from the Tyrol and the northern Italy uh, thing. There were generations of primarily did work in coal mines. My grandpa was in northern Tyrol, almost near Austria. My my grandma, that's all my maternal grandparents. My grandma was born in a little town called Riverola Canavesa. It's in the Piedmont part, north of Torino. And my mother's from the old country. My mother came here when she was 5 years old. They all came, and actually there were four Sperandio brothers that came in the around the turn of the 19th century. Two of them came to Illinois. One went to Missouri. I understand my dad's cousins. The others, the ones in Missouri turned out to be strawberry farmers. I understand. And the funny part is, both of my grandpas on both sides lost an arm in the mine. Both of them were lost an arm. I had two unarmed grandpas, but boy, you wouldn't have. They could use that other arm real good. My pop was born here in Illinois, in Glen Carbon, and strange enough, of course, he died when he was in 93. He was born, raised, and lived in the same house for 93 plus years. That was 69 School Street, Glen Carbon, Illinois. The story of that house, the coal mine, the Glen Carbon Coal Company, built a whole series along that whole street of School Street and at two other streets. In other words, they built these houses, frame houses, basically all alike. And they rented them at a very cheap, I forget what it was, to the miners. And when the mine closed, they offered the houses to the occupants in all the hullabaloo, and they offered them for $400. My dad didn't have $400, but they allowed him to pay it off so much, on a time payment thing. So my dad had bought that house. He kept it up, back then you did everything yourself. It was a little old 2-bedroom house, but they had sheds behind it. They had a wash shed, and then they had another shed, and then they had a coal shed. My grandma actually, they had two coal miner buddies that rented and lived in those sheds, and one of them was real close to my dad, and he'd call him Bud, and so they called my dad Bud. It got its name Valley of Coal, Glen Carbon. The town had 1,100 people, and they were basically Italian, German, and Polish, Czechoslovak, all coal miner types, basically. It had one store, and then it had a meat market. It had a little bitty variety store that really wasn't one, and it was owned by the one Jewish family we had in town, and his name was Sam, but we called him Sheeny Sam because he was very tight, obviously. But another thing about, and we had the one school, it was on School Street. I was 5 houses down from the school. But another thing about the town that was very unique, it had 1,100 people, but back then it had 11 saloons. And each one had their own bunch of buddies, just like my grandpa with his over there in Maryville. Same concept. My mom's people settled in a little town called Maryville, Illinois, which is 5 miles from Glen Corbin. And my grandpa there worked in the coal mine in the Maryville area. And he lost an arm, and so he had to quit coal mining. So he bought, or either bought or built a saloon in this little town of 500. And he was a saloon keeper till he died. Yeah, I have a picture of the saloon because they lived in the back of the saloon. And we were there faithfully every Sunday for good Italian dinner. Of course, a lot of Italian food. Dad used to talk about him and Bud going hunting together and going fishing, going to the saloon, and Dad, as a little boy, would have to sit on the stool while Bud would drink beer and Dad would get a Coke or something. And back then, all the saloons had either boiled eggs or pickled pig feet and things like that on there, and Dad would have that. He talked about his Bud all the time. They were, heck, it was like an uncle to him, you know. Mom spoke good Italian, and but one funny part is, my dad didn't. My dad was born here, but Mom made sure that none of us, my kids, in other words, me, my sister, and my brother, she never would speak Italian around us. She didn't want us to have an accent. Now, but when she was with Grandma, and of course I learned, obviously, you pick up a little bit, mangiata, and a few more important things, you know. My mom went to, I think, the 5th grade. My dad went to the 4th grade, and when he was 8 years old, he went into the mine, and he was a mule skinner. He you know, they dug the coal, put it in these little carts, had tracks, and they had a mule, and Dad did that. Everybody knew Joe Sperandio, even around the area. My dad he was outgoing, and he was loved by everybody, and he was into everything. He was for over 25 years. He was the fire chief of a volunteer fire department. He was the town like secretary that, you know, paid all the bills and everything. And he then, after the coal mine closed, he became an electrician. He was a master electrician, and everybody wanted Joe to do their work. Dad used to tell me about courting Mom. And of course, the towns were 5 miles apart. Dad used to walk, of course, through the fields and over a little hill to get to Maryville. So maybe it cut it down to maybe 3 miles, actually, straight. He used to court Mom by walking over and visiting with her and everything. And the minute they got married, they moved in with my grandma and grandpa, the Sperandio grandma and grandpa. And shortly thereafter, grandma and grandpa moved out to another house, and my dad and Mom stayed there. And so that's why my dad never moved out of that house. Things were doggone tight. The things were tight pretty much all my childhood. You know, a nickel was a hell of a deal. My sister is 7 years younger than I am. She just recently passed. My brother is 14 years younger than I am, and he lives in Florida, and he was in during the, I guess, Korean War. He was in the Army. I was born at home. All three of our kids were born at home, all three of us. In that house, in one of the 2 bedrooms. Yep. That house is still there, but it's in pretty, not the best shape right now because it's. Mom worked in one of the ketchup companies out of near Maryville had a plant, and Mom worked in that plant from when she was a teenager, and worked in it until she got married. And then she became a house at home. Oh yeah, we had an old time Catholic church that we were born in. christened in, baptized in, the whole spiel. As a matter of fact, my wife and I were married there in my hometown because her parents were in Wichita, Kansas. They were moving down to Corpus Christi. So we were married at my church. And there's one of the candlesticks that was on, the church was torn down, a new church was built, a bigger one. That candlestick was on the altar when I was married. And it was there when I was born, too. I had two cousins that were a little bit younger than me, but basically run with. There were about 5 or 6 of us that were very close. And we all went to school, the little schoolhouse. There was no organized activities. We made up our own. And we had things for certain times of the year. Like this particular time of the year might be marble time, and we played marbles. This time of the year would be baseball, and we'd have pickup games. We'd go out and we'd pick up. We all rode fancy bikes. They were fancy back then, and all our bikes, usually, the rich kids had Schwinn, but I only had one rich kid in my gang. The other 4 or 5 of us had either the major Sears Roebuck or Montgomery Ward. We called them Cheesy Roebuck and Monkey Ward, and I had a Montgomery Ward bike, and it was a beauty. It was red with a tank and skirts and a speedometer that worked off and lights and a horn. And we all had handlebars, and at the end of the handlebars, we all kept squirrel tails in there that would fly. Now, we had artificial, but then when my uncles, or later when I go with them shooting, we'd get the live squirrel tails until they smelled too bad, and we'd put them in there. But we had all kinds of games. We marbles, kick the can, a cork ball. Back then it was all makeup. But at 5 o'clock every night, if I was within, I'd hear this. It was my dad. Joseph, you better get home because it's time for dinner. Mom, of course, most of it was home cooking, a lot of Italian, a lot of pork chops. We raised chickens. We had our own garden. The field behind my house had a lot of rabbits, had doves. And when I got older, I did all the shooting, all that. It was, and then it was mostly that type of cooking. But another very interesting thing about that too, every night at about 8 or 8:30, Mom would set a spread on the kitchen table, salami, luncheon meats, and bread, and we all ate. Again, we all had a sandwich and sat down and talked. And Dad would want to know what happened during the, typical, real family oriented. We were real family oriented. They were very strict, but still very loving. We didn't have to say, we watched ourselves. And when Mom or Dad said something, do this, do that, you did it. There was no question about it. But also, they gave us a lot of freedom. When we went to play, there was no such thing. They didn't care. As long as we came home when we were supposed to and everything. And if we were going we had a lot of sleepovers among these buddies. It was fine because all the parents were the same way. And there was no crime. There was none of this, what we have today. We had power. We had a cistern, rainwater. We had a pump. We didn't have air conditioning. We had the old window fans that you put in the windows and the exhaust fans. We had the fans. And when it was real hot in the summer, our front door had a little alcove there, and it had a screen door on the outside. And they'd open the front door, and Mom would put a pallet down, and I'd sleep on that instead of in my bedroom. And when my when my sister was born, I was still there, of course. She and I slept in the same room, the same bed, and uh, and we had a basement. Mom, during the summer, Mom would cook in the basement. She would do her laundry in the basement. She had an old-fashioned wash machine and a roller dry, take the water out. Then she'd hang the clothes outside. And a lot of times I would help, obviously, a lot of times. We had coal stoves back then. We didn't have furnaces. We had coal stoves. We had our kitchen, of course, was the old coal stove with the hot plates on top. We had a coal bucket there. We had a coal stove in the living room, and that was the only two that we had. We didn't have one in our bedrooms. We just used a lot of covers in our bedrooms. We had an ice box, the old-fashioned ice box, and the iceman would come. I forget, like every other day with the ice, and he'd bring it in and he'd put it in there. And same way with our food, we'd walk down the hill, maybe quarter of a mile, walk down the hill to the grocery store. To Ilaria's, they were of course good old Italians too, and they would keep a monthly tab. We didn't pay then, and then we bring it back, and so the little ice box, you had enough for the, and then at the end of the month, or end of every 2 weeks, whatever it was, Dad would give me money, cash, or Mom would do it if I didn't do it, and go down and pay off our bill. And a lot of times we'd go down and we couldn't carry it all, and Johnny had an old Plymouth truck at the store, and he would haul it up to our house and deliver it. So it was either that or, and then another thing that was very interesting. Back then, I forget who it was. Was it Kraft or somebody who had the insurance? 5 cents, I think it was 5 cents or a quarter a month on children for $1,000. And the insurance man used to come every month and collect his money. And of course, he was a neighbor, he would visit. And that $1,000, strangely enough, when I after Mary Ann and I got married, my first assignment was to to Washington D.C. to the gunnery school there, and I needed a car, and that first $1,000, Mom cashed the thing and gave it to me to buy a car. Every night, particularly during the summer, we had a little front porch, and we had a swing out there and a couple of chairs, and people would walk by and they'd come in and visit and hi and stop and chat. And another thing about the coal mine, in front of our house was a big well. It was on city property, and the miners in the morning when they'd walk by to go to the mine, they would pump water into the top of their miner's bucket from my pump. Well, the city got rid of that, and they gave my dad that pump, and I don't have it, but my sister and brother-in-law took it, and they put it in their yard. They live up in Effingham, near Effingham, Illinois. Back then, it was the St. Louis Browns in the American League, and we loved them. And then they went to Baltimore. And then it was the St. Louis Cardinals were there at the same time. And I was a knothole gang at the St. Louis Browns. The kids, my dad would drive me down there, and we'd go and sit in the knothole section. Well, not all the time, but and sit there and because it was real cheap then, hell. And but again, that's very funny. My dad hated the Cardinals. But after the Browns left, my dad would sit out on his little chair. It was really a stool out in the. We had a little where you went into the side of the house. There was a pump, for a wash basin there, and there was a little room there. And Dad would sit on a little stool there, drinking his beer, and also Dad made home brew. drinking his beer, listening to the Cardinal game, cussing. Oh, I could hear him do
Everybody, this is Harry Carey from beautiful Busch Stadium in St. Louis with the St. Louis Cardinals and the Los Angeles Dodgers.
He did that
start a
until
vital
he, well,
three-game series.
until he was 93. He was still doing that. Oh yeah, every Sunday, every Saturday morning, go to the movie theater, 5 cents, and back then they had charts as well as the main movie, and of course Saturday morning it was a kid type movie always, and sometimes one of the dads would take us, but most of the time we would ride our bike the 5 miles to the movie. And then every Saturday night was shopping, and mom and dad and the kids, all from all over, would go into Edwardsville and shop. Now there was a town 5 miles the other way from Maryville called Collinsville. It was a little bit bigger, and sometimes we'd go over there too because they had a few more stores. Well, Christmas was it, and the town was all lit up, and really, Christmas was big, and we'd all go down to the town square Christmas Eve and sing songs, and they would pass out candy and things and everything. Everybody go down there, and Memorial Day that was usually about the time our school let out. And Memorial Day, we always had a parade, and we always had, back then, World War I vets in the parade with flags and everything. And we'd parade. And every summer, every one of these little towns would have a homecoming. They called it a homecoming back there. And it really was. They'd have a lot of booths and activities. And a lot of the people who had left it would come for it was a homecoming, and each town, and we would have one, and we'd go through that. Halloween was a very special time. We as kids, we would play pranks. We'd throw corn at houses and everything, and we had a couple of old rascals there we really didn't like. They were kind of old crabs, and it was not uncommon for us that night to push over the outside toilet. And I think they knew who in the heck we were and everything, but that was just part of it. And another thing we did at Halloween, particularly one down the street on School Street, further down about right at the end of School Street, was a guy that I know he was putting on, but come out. Well, if you take, back then, all the windows were with all wooden. If you took a thumbtack and you took a little, like thread, a little string, and you pushed it in, then you took this string back and went back into the bushes or something, and you took held it taut, and you took a piece of wood, and you did this, it would go squeak, 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 and you'd hear it, and he'd come out yelling, That was part of our Halloween. But we never did any real, except for, but we'd stop and get candy everywhere too, obviously. Yeah, and we'd dress up. Every summer, we were a few miles from the famous Mississippi River bottoms, where the great, we lived sort of a hillside, and the bottoms was where all the good farmland was, because it was every once in a while it'd get flooded, and it was good farming. We would go down and pick potatoes, and we got $1.50 a day and a free lunch, and we'd ride our bikes down there. It was about 3 or 4 miles. Ride our bikes down there. We'd pick potatoes, and boy, that's hard work. He'd come in with his tiller, and he'd break them up, and they'd be on top, and you'd lay them down, and you'd fill a basket, and then you go dump it. And we do that usually till about 2 o'clock, till it got really hot. And then we'd of course, we stopped for lunch, and then we'd go back in for a little while. But anyway, then we'd bike back home, and we got $1.50 a day. When I got a little older, my last couple of 3 years, I caddied at the local golf course, which was 5 miles away over the hills. And I biked there and caddied. And I was paid 40 cents a round, but usually you would get a tip of 10 cents, so you'd get 50 cents a round. And I did that for a couple of years. I loved school. I was a good student. My closest friend, Leonard Durham, and I fought each year who was going to be number one and who was going to be number two. All through school, grade school, high school, we were always like that. I loved school, and I had the advantage of having two cousins who were teachers at the school. And and when I was in the 8th grade, we had an escape for the 4 grades on top. We had an escape scoop. You slid down, and every year some guy would be assigned to keep clean. So which meant once a week he got to slide down that. He was a big man on the campus. Well, obviously with my cousin being the 8th grade teacher, guess who became the slider? And I used to slide down that. When we went to high school, we had to walk down the hill and get a bus and go about 5 miles north to a bigger town, Edwardsville, where our high school was. Well, it was the township high school. It was for all the little towns around there that couldn't afford a high school. It was the township high school. It was a great school. It was a beautiful school. I think I had 120 in my class, somewhere around there. It was a good size. And like I said, we rode our bike a lot of times to and from, but most of the time we took the bus. Now, the unfortunate part of taking the bus was if you had some activity after school or something, which happened, the bus wouldn't wait for you. So then we had to hitchhike back home. And back then, hitchhiking, was really no problem. You could always find a ride. I belonged to a couple of clubs, the German club, the French club, and things like that. But no, I wasn't inclined to be a football player or a basketball player. I was in a couple of plays, of course, but other than that, no. My dad signed on at the Granite City Supply Depot, Army Supply Depot. He worked down there. Of course, we were on rationing. We had the rationing cards for gasoline. Money was tight. Every airplane come over, you'd think, boy, is that a... But there were airfields all around there, and we, as kids, we got to recognize, like particularly some of the bombers and that. You could, oh boy, that, and everything. Well, I want to fly that, no, and all that stuff. But it was tough, and then you'd see guys, maybe not your direct buddies, but guys that you know and grew up with. They start leaving in that, and I think all of us, I think we all had a same kind of feelings. I mean, it wasn't. We knew we were going to go. There was no question about it. Absolutely no question. And I had one of my real buddies, the one that I used to, Leonard Durham, and I decided. We talked. Of course, we played together all day. We said, let's go in the Navy. Why? I think the biggest choice is, back then they had a thing that said, join the Navy and become a pilot. But more important to Leonard and I was, we were down-to-earth kids. We'd talk about this. And I don't know which one of us said it, but we both agreed, sleeping in those holes doesn't sound as good as sleeping on that bunk in that ship. And having meals and everything and not eating all these rations. Well, anyway, we both went down and went through the process. We had to go to St. Louis. It was several trips and everything. They gave us a test and all this, and then a physical and everything. And then they said, if you go into this Navy aviation program, we'll let you finish high school. And then you can start active duty on the 1st of July of 1943. And that's what happened. They officially signed up in March. So my active duty date, actually, my military date starts in March. And so and then on July the 1st, we met in St. Louis, took a train, and went to active duty as an apprentice seaman. Well, in this program, our boot, our basic, was at a little college in Tennessee called Milligan College. The whole college was taken over by the Navy. And so our boot and basic, and actually at the same time, by doing this, I was there a year, and really we got a year's college credit too at the same damn time. Well, we were there maybe 9 months or so, but anyway, we were there long enough, and so that was our boot. And then at that time, they said, the Navy doesn't need any more pilots. Now, we'll send you to the fleet, or if you qualify, we'll let you go to midshipman school and become an officer. Well, guess what? My buddy went to the fleet. I became an officer. I went to midshipman school, ended up in midshipman school in Northwestern, University of Northwestern up in Chicago. I got my commission in 1945 and then was sent down to Florida, and I was aboard a patrol craft. We were out when we got the message. It came over the ship information, and it was announced it was over. And, hey, we even shot some guns and all that stuff. That's right near the end of the war. I go over it in the Philippines to pick up my landing craft tank and to train with the tank crew to go to Okinawa to train for the invasion of Japan. Yeah. Oh yes, I remember that very much. Yeah, I said, boy, that's great. That's great, because we had already been prepped and told it's not going to be easy. There are going to be a lot of casualties on both sides, and the landing craft tank, we were in the first waves to go in, and the little landing craft of a tank that I had was a little ship, and it'd go in and drop at ramp, and the tank crew would go off, and what we had scrounged a 50 caliber machine gun that we rigged up on our ship, but that's about what we had. Well, we had pistols and a couple of rifles, but right after that, then we all went in. We were scheduled to go off Sasebo, where our landing was. So we went in right after the war, went into Sasebo, and we didn't take tanks, of course. And then the Navy had some merchant ships, and it was called SCAJAP, Shipping Control Authority Japan. It was Navy run. And what they would do, these merchant ships would go over to Korea and Manchuria and pick up the Japanese soldiers and repatriate them and bring them back to Sasebo, to the outer harbor. We in these little, there were, I think, 5 of us, a division of these landing craft tanks. We'd go out and we'd pick up these Japanese soldiers, maybe 25 or 30. We had where a tank would go, we had a clear deck there. We'd pick up 25 or 30 of them. We'd take them in to the station. We called it a delousing station because that was the first thing they did, obviously, is clean them up, where they were then transferred and sent to their homes or whatever. That was our job. And I did that for a couple of 3 months. Yeah, and then I got orders to go to Tokyo. To go to SCAJAP headquarters up there, which was headed by a rear admiral. And I took a train from Sasebo up through the island. As a matter of fact, went through Hiroshima on the way, up to the next island, up to Tokyo, and got up there and went into Sasebo. And went into Tokyo, reported in, and the flag secretary said, "You are the new admiral's aide." Well, it turned out to be a real big deal. I've been told that I was the only ensign admiral's aide in the Navy because most of them were lieutenants or lieutenant JGs. As a matter of fact, uh, a captain came through from Washington visiting, and he said, "You don't deserve that link. You're an ensign. You can't be an aide." I said, "You better talk to the admiral, captain." But I was aide to Admiral Charles Mompson, who himself is well known. You've heard of the Mompson lung that for rescuing sailors and the rescue of the sailors on the Squalus. He was the guy that did all this. He was a real hero in the 30s, and he was in charge, and I was his. And being the flag lieutenant or junior aide, he had two aides. He had me, and then he had a flag secretary, who usually was a lieutenant commander or a commander. But being the junior one, I was a gopher, and his wife was there, and I had a apartment on the Daiichi building, but I also spent a lot of time out at the house when they entertained or when Missy, I called her, and they treated me like their son. I was young, and they had son. They had a couple of sons that were in the Navy and everything, but they treated me just like one of the family. It was very quiet, very serious. There was a lot of damage, of course, but it was, and the people were very well. The Japanese people traditionally are very low key and very somber and everything, and they were, and almost to the point where sometimes you think you feel that they were your servants or something. That type of concept. But they were very helpful. Had absolutely no problem. Didn't have to worry about theft or anything. And a pack of cigarettes went a hell of a long way. I had a couple of the guys there. I had a lieutenant there that I got very close to. They were friends. I got pictures of he and I. But anyway, we'd go bumming. We'd go to a geisha house. We'd go out to eat. Uh, we golfed a little bit. We had activities. And with the Admiral, I got to see a lot of Japan, but I also got to see a lot of Tokyo, like Mount Fujiyama. I got to go up quite a bit on that and things like that. And what, young buck, had a good time. The Admiral decided I ought to make a career of it. And see, back then I was a USNR, Naval Reserve, all the officers. And the Admiral, I don't know, sometime during the time I was aide, near the latter part of my age, he said, "Joe," he said, "you got to go regular Navy." He said, "You've got everything going for you. You go regular Navy." So I thought about it. Sounded like a pretty good deal. He said, "I'll send you to school. I'll get you a good assignment." And I said, "Well, can I go in submarines?" He said, "Joe, they're going to amphibs or regular ships because submarines," he said, "you're already behind a couple of years, those that went direct into submarines." And he said, "You're better off. You have a better career going this route," which I did. And he got me in the regular Navy. And part of the regular Navy, back then, you had to have 2 years of college to be an officer, a regular officer. Well, I only had one. So the first thing they did was when we left Japan and came back to the States, they sent me to a college. I went to the University of Louisville to get that second year. That's where I met Marianne. They sent me to Louisville. Matter of fact, the Admiral had asked, "Where would you like to go to college?" I said, "I'd like to go somewhere close, like St. Louis or somewhere, or University of Illinois or somewhere." Well, I got Louisville, which is, I wasn't really into all the college activities. I was a little older than them, obviously, and I was a man of the world. And there happened to be they didn't have a big NROTC, but they had a little one, and the lieutenant in charge, Charlie, and I became real because we were the only two naval officers in there. I didn't wear uniform. I didn't wear a uniform at school, of course. But anyway, Charlie and I became very, very good friends, and he had a car. I left for school out California. She stayed there. At this time she was working for the distillery there, and so some cheaper whiskey. But anyway, she stayed there, and I was going to be out there 8 months for school, and I went out there, and I sent her a train ticket over the Christmas holidays for her to go to Illinois to see meet my mom and dad. Well, yeah, I was out there. I couldn't go back. And so she went there and met mom and dad. And mom called me shortly after and she said, "We approve." and then in the spring, I brought her out. I sent her money for a train ticket. And she came out. And at that time, I had one of my roommates was a lieutenant, Navy pilot. And Roy was a great guy. He was a great guy. And he and I were real buddies. And he had one of these old fancy Lincolns, this convertible, what the Z's or whatever they were. And he and I used to, Saturdays, we'd go out a lot. Every once in a while, we'd go to San Francisco for the weekend, and spend the night up there and come back. Well, he took me up there, and I bought an engagement ring up there at their jeweler. And she came out, and I gave her the engagement ring at the time. And that sealed it, of course. And then I finished up out there, and on the way back, we made arrangements for her parents were moving. They were going to live in Kansas. Her older brother lived in Corpus Christi, and he talked the parents into coming down there. So they were moving to Corpus Christi. So she agreed that we'd have the wedding at my old church in Illinois. And that was on, that candlestick was on. Family was there. Charlie and Mary Jean at that time had gotten married. So they came back and were best man and matron of honor. It was a uniform. We wore uniforms. Two of my cousins who bummed around me were, and she had a couple of bridesmaids that she'd gone to school with. In other words, and my sister was one of the bridesmaids. But anyway, it was all family oriented, and we had it at the church, then had a reception at the church hall. And then we went back and had the real party at my house, where my uncles got me totally wiped out, drunk. And the women were all upstairs with Marianne and everything, doing all their things. We were down in the basement, of course. That's where the basement was, and we were all down there just chewing. And my uncles, they were. I had 4 uncles, my mom's brothers, and they got me spoiled. So one of my cousins drove us. I had made reservations down in St. Louis at a fancy hotel, Forest Park Hotel. We drove down, went in, I signed the thing, and Marianne said, "Honey, didn't you put and Mrs.?" I had put Joseph L. So we spent the night, and of course we were married on December 23rd. So we spent the night. My cousin came down the next day, picked us up. We went out back home to Glen, to my house, and we spent the night there. And we had Christmas, and then the day after Christmas, we went down to St. Louis and got on a train and went to Miami Beach for our honeymoon. And then after our honeymoon, we went to my first assignment up the gun factory in Washington, D.C. Was in D.C. at the Naval Gun Factory, learning about guns and gunnery, which turned out to be my specialty for the rest of my career, ordnance and gunnery. We got into Washington, D.C., and we rented a hotel, a hotel room, got in a hotel, and I called my admiral, Admiral Mompson, who was there, Admiral Missy. And he said, Joe, I remember these words, what in the hell are you doing in that hotel? He said, you're coming home with me. And so he came, he said, I'll be there in an hour. So he came in and got Marianne and I and took us out to the hotel. They lived in the country out in Washington, D.C. And Missy and we spent, I think, a day or two with them, really. And just like I say, I was like their son. So I said, there's this one apartment over across the river in Anacostia, where the gun factory was close over there. I said, I'd sure like to get it, but it's a doctor who goes to, during the winter, he goes down to, after Christmas, he goes down to Florida for a few months. And I'm only going to be here, I think, 4 months or something. And so the admiral said, I'll drive you over and we'll look at it. So we went over, and this guy had all kinds of antiques and everything. It was real fancy. It was overlooking the river. A real nice apartment, small one, but real nice. And we looked at it, and he said, I don't know, you're Navy, I don't know. And the admiral said, this is a fine young man. And the doctor said, and who are you? And he said, I'm Admiral Mompson. The guy said, you say it, okay, you can have the apartment. So we were there actually for Truman's inauguration. And we were sitting there watching the fireworks and everything across for his inauguration night. So we stayed in that apartment. And we really had to watch ourselves because it was all, and I broke one of the old cups. And Marianne wasn't very happy about that. But you know what it did? There weren't many days that I spent any time in the kitchen from then on the rest of my life with Marianne. She'd keep me out of the kitchen. She was a gourmet cook. Yeah. And when we left Washington, I went for the pre-commissioning of the USS Salem, a big heavy cruiser, which was my first real big ship that I was going to be on. I was first division officer, which was I was in charge of the forecastle, where the anchor and everything was, and the main deck all around. I had my division was the first division, and we were the ones that kept all that clean, and we were the ones that had the holy stones, the teak decks and everything, and we were right there by the captain's cabin and the admiral's cabin. We were right there. It was being commissioned, and I was in the commissioning detail, and then I made lieutenant I made Lieutenant JG at that time, and boy, I was in the money. I'm on the way, and by that time. But it wasn't long after that when Drea came along, our first daughter. Yeah. But I wasn't there for the birth of my first two. The Salem had been commissioned, and when a ship is commissioned, the first place to go is to Guantanamo Bay for training. They call it a shakedown cruise, shake down the ship. And I was down there, and as a matter of fact, my wife moved before the baby was born, right before Drea was born. Admiral Mompson had a son who was in the submarine base at New London. And Admiral said, it's time for Marianne to go up and stay with them up there because his wife was going to have a baby, and the two wives it was going to be a month apart, and they could take care of one another while I was gone. The Admiral was still involved with me. So she went up there. Well, for quite some time, I was not going with any gal, and Charlie and Mary Jane and I would go out at night, party. We had money. We had money. And I met a redhead. And it didn't take long for Mary Jane to say, I don't like that redhead, Joe. She said, I got a friend. Would you mind going out with her once? Oh, sure, So, to make a long story short, and Charlie and I wore a uniform. We were going to a place where uniform got you in some club, because it was first night with this gal. We went, and here was this beautiful brunette. Her picture's in there on the wall. Just gorgeous. And we partied. But anyway, at the end of the night, we dropped Marianne off, and Mary Jane and I and Charlie, and then we dropped Mary Jane off, and then Charlie took me home. I lived just on a street just down in a lodging house near the university, and Charlie took me home, dropped me off. Before he dropped me off, I said, Charlie, I'm going to marry that gal. And that was it. Katie barred the door. She just had everything. She had everything. She's personality. She was down to earth. She was a Kansas gal, farm gal type. She just, we clicked right then and there. And she tells me that she felt the same way, really. She came from a very poor Kansas family. Father, he did odd jobs. He was a World War I vet who lost a lung in World War I. And so he was handicapped to a certain extent. And but they were very poor, and lived in a little community right outside of Wichita Falls. She had an aunt in Louisville who was very close. And so the aunt had a little, and the aunt worked for the railroad and was pretty well off, basically. The aunt talked her when she graduated from high school to come to Louisville and to live with her and go to the University of Louisville. And so that's what she did. She was smart, yeah, and she fit in, and that was it. Oh, there were many nights, because Charlie and Mary Jane by this time were getting very close too, and so the four of us, during the winter we'd go sledding on the hills, and there weren't many nights we didn't. I was smart enough and that I didn't have to really sweat a lot by school. Yeah, and I had money. And like Mary always said, she said one of the things that was that I always knew you had money to take care of things. Well, I was there, and I guess in the spring, I was going to finish my year. In other words, I was going to have my 2-year requirement. And my next assignment, I got orders when school was over to go to the postgraduate school in Monterey, California. They had a general line school out there for line officers. Line officers are the officers that go in the fleet, the real sailors. And I went and before I went, I knew. And I have a picture in there of the night that I proposed to her. Because he had gotten me on the sail, he'd got me this gun factory and the Salem. But anyway, we went up there, and I was and a gun director. We were shooting off the gun range off Guantanamo, Cuba, when I got a little message sent up from the captain that my daughter had been born. But anyway, and that was the way it transpired, and that was the real start of my career. Now I'm in the real Navy, And my job on the Salem was the first division officer was also in charge of all the 5-inch guns, the secondary. See, we had 8-inch guns and the 5-inch. And my job was being on the gun director, which was the highest good director on the ship. And I controlled these 5-inch guns, the shooting of them and everything. And I had a big telescope and everything. And I had a 2-man crew to do everything. And we were controlling the guns and everything. And that was my job. And I was up in that doggone gun director when the captain sent up this note that my daughter had been born. Yeah, she was born early, and that was it. Well, I was in the Mediterranean primarily. There were 2 cruisers there. And we were the newest cruiser, and the fleet admiral liked our cruiser better than the other one. So he sent the other one and kept us there. So we did all the, like we cruised. We went to Greece. I've been to the Greek island where King Ferdinand back then, King and Queen had their summer thing, and we got invited to them. I met them. I met the who became the king of Spain, their son, and we traveled all around Italy and North Africa and Lebanon. And the best shore leave stories were in the Mediterranean, obviously, because the reason for the fleet to be over there was to show the flag. And usually the cruiser, the fleet commander would usually go. They'd start in Gibraltar, and they'd go up all along the French Riviera over to the Italian Riviera down to, and everywhere we went, we had to. One of the biggest places was near. I forget the name of the little town, but it was near where the gambling is. It was east of Monte Carlo, little town, Villafranche. And we would usually stay there about 2 weeks. And when we stayed there, we had to send our own shore patrol aboard, ashore. And I and the Marine captain always volunteered for shore patrol duty. So we'd go ashore for 2 weeks, and we'd live ashore, and it was fun. It was fun. But then we'd go to all these towns, and you'd go in, and you'd always be you'd find things to do, activity to do, and of course, then going to Naples is when we went to Rome. And 25 of us I got a private audience with Pope Pius XII. We went up, and back then he lived in the Vatican in the quarters, and he had a big reception room. So they brought us all in the reception room. We always stand there in uniform, in one group, and looking down was a long hallway. And that hallway was down to where his quarters were. And that hallway was all in red velvet cloth, the whole thing, with the rugs, velvet rugs, beautiful. And all of a sudden, here comes this figure, and he was a tall man anyway, and he was very, very well proportioned, and he had on white, little white slippers and everything, and come down, and by golly, you felt like it was God coming down. And he came down, and he welcomed us all in English, fairly good English, gave a very short chat, blessed us all, and then came around, and each one of us, he shook our hand, and some of us he asked me, he said, "Young man, where are you from in the United States?" And I said, "I'm from a little town called Glen Carbon in Illinois." "Well, thank you, goodbye." And he did that for all of us. So anyway, then when I got back from there is when I was transferred. I think by that time, then I made a lieutenant, and I would think I was transferred to the USS Wright. It was a light carrier, aircraft carrier. These were the middle carriers that were converted from cruisers to carriers. And at that time, I was senior enough that I became the gun boss, head of the gunnery department. And again, I was really ahead of my time because all the other department heads were lieutenant commanders, and I was the only lieutenant department head. Well, it was as big as a Salem because it had a flight deck in it. It was a cruiser with a flight deck on it. They'd converted them. There were three types of aircraft carriers. There was the bigger CVs. Then there was the Salem class, was a CVL. And then there was a CVE. Oh, I forgot. I was ordered, before I went to the Wright, I was ordered to the Block Island, or CVE, as gun boss. But they weren't commissioned yet, and I was only there about 3 months when they sent me to the Wright. The Wright needed a gun boss, and Wright was active, and so it was very typical home. Of course, when you were home on a ship, you still had to go to the ship every day. And every third or fourth day, you had duty, so you spent 24 hours. You were on a 24-hour duty, so you'd have to stay there a whole day and night. But then when you were home on weekends and when you didn't have duty, it was normal life. Do with the kids, go to picnics. We did a lot. And back then, the Navy, and I'm sure the Army and everybody else did the same thing. We all congregated together. In other words, when we were at sea, all the shipboard wives, usually the captain's wife, would make sure they take care of all the shipboard wives, and they'd have their monthly coffee clatches and local groups and everything who lived in the same vicinities. The Navy back then was a very close-knit organization. Oh, the night times. Oh, particularly around sunset, when that sun would go down. And particularly if the sea was fairly calm and you had nobody around. It was serenity, I guess that's one way to put it. And you just sit there or stand there, or if it was real calm and you weren't on duty or a lot of times you'd go up to the forecastle and hang on the rails and let it just, and maybe a little bit of spray come up, and then another real great time was the 4 to 8 watch in the morning, because that's when the cooks and the bakers, and particularly on the smaller ships, you were close enough, and so and the bakers always had baked goods by 4 o'clock in the morning. So usually you'd go by and the baker would give you a big slice of fresh bread with butter on it and jelly on it and a cup of coffee, and you'd take that up. I'd go up to the bridge, take that up, and that was, and again, then the sunrise, same thing, and it was just, and being a deck officer, I spent a lot of time on the bridge or on the deck, because that's where I was. And on the bridge, every ship until I became command, I would have con duties where I would be for 4 hours. I'd be conning, because the captain wasn't there all the time, obviously. And there's nothing like it. Now, when it got rough, it was still loaded. You lived with it. You lived with it. You learned. We learned how to move the ship for the least bit of trouble. You always, if you got real heavy waves and wind coming this way, you always angle the ship off about 30 degrees and let it hit you like that. That was the safest spot. Never be to your stern, because you didn't want to raise your anchor, your screws out of the water, obviously. Well, after the ride and shore duty and this and that, and on the Ticonderoga, a bigger carrier as the special weapons officer, the atomic bomb officer. Then I got orders as operation, which is the third to a destroyer, the Henley, on the East Coast, and I did a couple European Mediterranean cruises on her. And as a matter of fact, I don't remember the dates, but back when England and France went to war against Egypt on that Suez Canal, we were the last Navy ship to go through the canal before they closed it. The Henley, USS Henley. We were the last, and I got pictures of her upstairs. But anyway, we were the last ship to go through, and we were the first Navy ship, and to come back and go through again when they opened it up. So I spent time in the Persian Gulf and all that long before today's. And back then, we stopped at the ports and everything, and we didn't have any real problems. We spent an awful lot of time in Ethiopia, Abu Dhabi, and the Navy about that time came out with a big thing. They were looking for education, for people for education, and of course I had 2 years of college, and they were looking for people in particular who in mathematics and physics. I guess they're getting ready for that age. Well, I went to the captain and I said, "Captain, I'd like to put in for that." He said, "Joe, you're too damn old." That's exactly the word he used. I said, "Well, I'm going to put in for it anyway." So I put in for it, and we had to be interviewed in Washington, D.C. So we went up to Washington, D.C., and a Navy captain interviewed me. And we interviewed me and talked to the captain for a long time. He said, "Well, yeah," he said, "you're a little senior, a little old." He said, "The Admiral really, really likes mathematics and physics." I said, "Captain, I'd love to go in. I got orders. Back to Louisville." My captain said, "Damn it, Joe. You don't deserve that." I said, "I got it." So I went back to Louisville and finished my college and got my degree under the Navy. And my wife, and by that time, and Joy, my fourth daughter, was born while we were there in Louisville. And I got that. So I got my degree. And then the Navy, and I've been gunnery all this time. So it was time to go ashore. So I got orders from the Navy all of a sudden to go to the ammunition depot in Oklahoma. And I no sooner got the orders than a few days later I got a message. By that time I had four girls. The quarters aren't big enough for you down there, so we're sending you to Keyport, Washington instead, the Naval Torpedo Station, which turned out to be the best deal that ever happened to me. So I went to Keyport, Washington, and became the production officer at the Naval Torpedo Station up there. And that was fabulous duty. Had beautiful quarters on Puget Sound, had our own little oyster bed down there, had cherry trees. I made big cherry wine, had cherry trees. There were 11 officers, and we had about 250 civilians. We had a torpedo range to test. We took all the torpedoes, checked them out, tested them, and shipped them to the carriers and to the cruise. To the submarines or the destroyers who had torpedo tubes. We tested and repaired, and then sent them back for upgrading and all that. We did all that, and we did all the new torpedoes, new versions and new things, and it was a fabulous tour of duty. It was And then one big picture up there shows us when we get ready to leave there. I'll talk to you about that later. And we partied, of course. We had our own little station there, and all the quarters were right together. And it was a fabulous tour of duty. And I was there until I got orders to my next destroyer, the Shields, down in San Diego. And I got orders as an executive officer. And I make a lieutenant commander before I left. I became fleeted up to lieutenant commander, which is the normal billet for an executive officer of a destroyer. So I went down there and had a great captain and rented a house over at on the island over there, and lived over on the North Island the whole time I was there. Then after I don't know how many months, but getting ready for our first cruise to the Pacific, 7-month cruise, and we're on the way over, and my captain gets sick, and he has what is Bell's palsy. So they flew a plane out and picked him up, and the division commander, the captain of our 3 destroyers, was in another destroyer, and he sent over to me and said, "Joe, you're qualified. You're going to take over as captain." Instead of sending a new commander in, they sent me as captain, and I became captain of the Shields, and went through captained through the cruise, etc., etc., etc. And I, again, I was a rank below the normal step of all of them. So I happened to be, I guess I was lucky to always be one step below. Navy men dream, any naval officer, line officer. And the submariners dream the same thing, but for submarine. Every naval officer dreams of being captain of a destroyer. That is the last level where you have some independence. From above that, you always have somebody over you, usually on board with you. At the destroyer level, a lot of times, even if you're with the fleet, as part of the carrier group, sometimes you're sent off to visit such and such, or to patrol here by yourself, and things. That's the last. I call that the epitome of the naval career, pure Navy. And back then, let's face it, the captain was God. He was it. He was it. He ruled. And if you weren't a tough captain, you had to be good, but you had to be tough too. You did all the captain's mast, and you sentenced everybody, usually to aboard ship, or things like that, like no more liberty and things like this. But anyway, you were it. You were at the top of the heap. The Shields turned out that it was the best destroyer in the fleet. We happened to be the only one that had a special setup. We had special boilers. Back then it were all coal-fired or not coal, oil-fired boilers. And all of them took hours. You had to, when you were getting ready to go to sea, the firemen would get down there and light those boilers, and it'd take them a long time to build up, maybe hours, to build up enough steam, because you were steam powered, all your stuff. Well, they were going to try it, and the Shields was the only one that had special boilers that it was almost instantaneous. We could build up steam extremely fast. But also, we were the fastest destroyer in the fleet. And we had big monsters, one screw. Most of them had 2. We had one big monster screw. But we were the fastest destroyer of the fleet. And we were unique in that point. And the crew, I had a crew, and they were great. And As a matter of fact, down the road, when I go to the ship reunions, that's the only ship reunion I ever went to, and I still go to them. But one of the guys that I know real well that goes to the reunion, he's told me more than once. He said, "Captain, you saved my life when you got me at court martial, and well, that wasn't court martial; it was captain's mast, and straightened me out." He said, "You saved my life by doing it," which made me feel pretty good. But the Shields was just unique, and we did a lot of patrolling. We plane guarded. The destroyer back then had about three basic duties. The first one was plane guarding, where you were behind the aircraft carrier in case a plane went down. You were there to pick. They didn't have a lot of helicopters in that back then. It was early in the game. We were also anti-submarine warfare, where we'd go out in front of the destroyers. And then third thing was they would send us off on independent duty to patrol. We did a lot of patrol of the Taiwan Straits, we called it. Now they call it the China Sea, between China and Japan and Taiwan. We patrolled. Our patrol was just inside the water, just outside the waters, and it was into international waters, about 5 or 7 knots, just patrolling down, watch the Chinese and reporting anything if they were doing anything like that. It was rather boring, but you just cruise along, and you cruise along. As you cruise along, they have the big snakes. The water snakes, very, very, very dangerous and they draw. And I had a carbine. And I used to try to shoot them. And then they had the Chinese used glass floats for their nets and floated. And I got a couple of them over here, a couple of those Chinese float nets. And then we'd go into Kaohsiung, into Formosa. There were 2 destroyers. One would be out and one would be in. And we'd trade off about every week to 10 days, in and out. And then we'd have shore leave in there and do what we wanted to do. And then, of course, we'd patrol on down, all the way down to Vietnam. And we'd go to Subic Bay in the Philippines. And we'd always go to Hong Kong for a week or so. When I got orders from the Shields, and I was ready for a commander, and they ordered me to San Francisco to take command of the T.E. Chandler, which was a newer and a bigger destroyer, and it was being converted into the first destroyer to carry a little helicopter for anti-submarine warfare. And that's where I became commander and commissioned the Chandler. And that was that commission pennant on my plaque in here that you saw. It was a recommission. They had taken it out and converted it. And I was in command when it was commissioned, which is a real honor. And the first order you give when you commission it is hoist the flag. And the first flag to go up is that commission pennant that goes up to the top spot and below it is then the U.S. flag. Something unique about that. My executive officer, who I hadn't met, I had met him earlier. He came to California. I think I told you this story before. Right? I think I told Mike this story. I was home I had gotten orders from the Shields, and I was getting ready to move when my prospective executive officer and the Chandler called and said he'd like to come visit me. Well, that was natural. Every Sunday we were always dressed and ready for callers in the afternoons. So here comes this car Sunday afternoon. Out comes a real sharp, young, black man. And he comes to the door and he says, "Captain, I'm Sam Gravely." "Oh, Sam, come on in." The Navy hadn't told me. Back then there were still some problems. Let's face it. He came in and we visited and chatted and had a little drink and everything. And I got a little history on him and everything. And finally, before he left, I said, "Hey, Sam," I said, "you know, all our stewards on the ship and cooks are all black." I said, "You going to have any trouble with those?" He said, "Captain, I will have no trouble. Don't worry one iota about that." Well, as it turns out, he became the first black admiral in the Navy. He was super. He was, well, first black admiral. You know, he had something on the ball. I got orders from the Chandler to go and take command of the Naval Ammunition Depot in Hastings, Nebraska. Let me tell you, it was the biggest naval ammunition depot in the world, in the Navy, in the country. I was sent there and had to go to Chicago, where the Navy had admirals in various sections of the country. They had, and the Midwest section was the admiral who, strangely enough, happened to be my first captain on the Salem. And he was now the admiral. So we knew one of it. And he said, "Joe, you are there to close the Naval Ammunition Depot." We were the biggest employer of Hastings, Nebraska. He said, "It will be closed by the 1st of July, 1966. And I was sent there in 63. He said, "You got 3 years." I went there, and that was my job. And basically what we did, we were still sending ammunition and everything to the fleet for Vietnam and everything. But we weren't restarting. See, they had made all. We had a plant that built 20 caliber. We had a plant for 8-inch guns. We had a plant for 5-inch guns, and I had 60,000 acres, and we had all these igloos, we called them, to keep all the. And we had our own railroad, our own train, and so we had to take all that stuff. And the useless stuff, we had to get all we used steam in that to steam it out and get rid of all the powder and all that, burn it all and everything. And I had to phase down. And some of the equipment was good enough I could send to the other ammunition depots that were still available. I gave a bunch to the state for their activities. And we had to phase down, and from being the biggest employer, we became no employer. But I must have done a pretty damn good job there, because President Eisenhower's Secretary of the Interior was Fred Seaton, and Fred Seaton was from Hastings. And as a matter of fact, he spoke at the decommissioning ceremony, and he knew I was retiring. And he said, "Joe, why don't you stay here in Hastings? I'll get you made mayor of the town." We wanted to go south. So that's what happened. But talking about my retirement, having been the captain of the destroyer, knowing what was ahead, it was either staff jobs, Washington, D.C., or on a staff, and probably not command of any bigger ship, because the higher you get, the more that Annapolis ring fits in there. And I had 4 daughters. And the daughters, some of them were in high school age. And one of the problems, and any parent would know this, we traveled so much and shifted around, that it wasn't uncommon for my kids to be in 2 schools in 1 year. When they start getting high school age, girls start getting a little antsy about this. They want to have their friend, they want to build it. And so I said, "Hell, what's ahead?" And I was up for captain. I said, and I talked to Marianne. I said, "I think maybe it's time." And she said, "I do too." We had a wonderful life up to that time. So we retired at that time. While I was there, a salesman came through with a course called Alexander Hamilton Institute. And basically, it was a 24-book course on business. And they used to say it's equivalent to a master's in business, but and you had tests and everything. I took that course and I did real well in it. And the guy came back and he said, "Joe, you're retiring. What do you got in for?" I said, "I don't have anything. I know I'm going to go south. I'm going to go down to I want to go down Carpus or somewhere down there, and I'll find something." He said, "Why don't you come work for us? Work for me?" And I said, "Well, it was a commission job deal." But he said, "I got a free area, Iowa and South Dakota." So, yeah, but it's a job. And I got thinking, it might be a good one. It's a sales job. It gave me, and a lot of cold calling, and I'd never done any of that. So it gave me an area that maybe, and so I went up there and we moved to Sioux City, Iowa, moved in, bought a house, moved in, and I would leave on a Monday morning. And we only had one car. Of course, we were right near the church, and right near the school. They all went to Catholic schools at the church. So we moved in, and every Monday morning I would get in my car and I would go out. Sometimes we had leads. I'd travel all through Nebraska and South Dakota and try to sell this. And it was all a cold call thing. And we had learned, I had to go to training to learn the sales pitch. And it was a one-time call. I mean, you either signed them up or you didn't. And if I made I forget how the number, but if I made so many calls, that meant I would have so much money for the week. And if I did it by Wednesday, I'd come home. If I didn't do it until Friday, I'd come home. And I'd come home Friday anytime. Sometimes I didn't make my number of calls. Most of the time I did back then. And it was a good course. It was a daggone course, but it took a lot of effort to do the daggone course. Well, I was up there in that winter, and and I knew it from Hastings, but I was in a controlled environment out in West Nebraska and in South Dakota in the winter, driving those roads and everything with chains and all that. And Marianne didn't have a car, so I finally. I don't like this. And the vice president of from Alexander Hamilton Institute from Washington, from New York, came out to see me, and he knew that I was unhappy. And he said, "I need a manager down here in Houston, Texas." He said, "Would you take the managership?" Well, that was a no-brainer. It was a no-brainer. So I came down here and worked with them for about a year and a half. And one of my daughters and I got friends with a friend down the street across, right next to where Dick is, my buddy. And he was vice president of a oil field equipment company. And we got very close. And he and got me a job with them as his assistant. The first job in the oil patch. Then my boss, my friend and boss, moves to another company as president. I go over there as assistant president. And then they have some problems and they're getting rid of that company. And he's going to go to another one. And he has a friend who is in the oil, is in the piping inspection, oil piping and everything, big piping for pipelines. I got into that and was the vice president of sales for him. And my major effort was selling the equipment, and primarily overseas. I spent an awful lot of time, and we had all the equipment on the Orenburg line, which was the big pipeline in Russia down into East Germany, and I spent at least once every 2 months I would go to Berlin, go to Checkpoint Charlie, and go into East Berlin, and visit with them. Then I'd go to Moscow and visit with the contractors. Were actually the people doing the job were actually Russian. This is pre-1989, yeah, and did all that, and did that, and then finally the time came to retire. When I was 72, I guess I retired. I kept getting more family. Grandkids getting married. My kids having more kids. Grandkids getting married. Great grandkids came along, and like my birthday. Well, my daughter Joy, who you met, has a lake house out at Lake LBJ out in the Marble Falls area. We had 25 of my family out there for my birthday, and we get together, and two of the kids live here in town. One lives in, my only son lives up in Carthage, and I got a daughter in Austin and a daughter in Tennessee, and both of them come in quite often to see me, and I communicate with them all, and we are family oriented. It's daggone real. Like even after I retired, as long as I could, even when I was working. As a matter of fact, my agreement with the pipeline company was, I traveled the states. I could always stop off at Glen Carbon on the way back and spend a night or two and then come home. It was automatic. So I kept up with my mom and dad, and when my mom died, I kept up with my dad. Always stopped there until it hit. When we went east, a lot of times I took my wife. We would drive. I'd go up to east, up to Pennsylvania. I had customers all along Pennsylvania, Ohio, and everything. My oldest daughter at that time lived in up near Cleveland. We'd always go up to Cleveland, spend some time, and I'd call on customers all the way back. But I always stopped at Glen Carbon on the way back. I always came in. Oh, she was something. She was a beauty. She was a great mother, a great housekeeper. And a gourmet cook. She started out. She wasn't that good a cook. But when I got orders to the sale, when the Salem was getting ready for a cruise, I sent her to Illinois to my mom's, and Grandma and Mom taught her good Italian cooking. She could cook the best Italian meals in the world, but she was a gourmet cook. She loved everything fresh, everything gourmet, and the girls. She taught the girls pretty well, and the kids, everybody loved her, and all my friends. And she was a party girl. She loved, because that's the military. Going back to that military orientation, when the destroyer, when the Shields was away, all the wives used Marianne and the exec's wife, and they were a clique. They'd get together for things. If one of them had a problem, they knew to call and somebody to help them take care of that problem. They were a group, and you lose that when you get. And that was one of the toughest things Marianne went through. It was tougher on her when I retired than it was on me, because she didn't have this feeling of relationship with other women close. It took her a long time to get oriented until she got involved in some of the Catholic things and some of the groups here. All right, what's the secret? Enjoy life. Keep active. Don't sit there and mope and watch TV all day. And I read a lot, but I read because I love to read. Be active. I played golf up until a couple of years ago. I still could play, but I'm doing back therapy now. But be active, be part of the family, and be there, and I go fishing. I do all that. I I walk my dog with my good friend who's a kid. He's 95, Dick, another World War II vet, down the street. And there's a picture of the bicycle. We go walking every morning with our dogs. Every afternoon at 3:30, we meet and go for bike ride with our dogs in our baskets in the front. I come home, and every afternoon at 4 o'clock, and I did this even before, I have my vodka tonic. And I have a glass of wine for dinner. Of course, when I was a little one, when I go to Grandma and Grandpa's, even in 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, Grandpa always gave us a little of his homemade wine, his Dago Red, is what they called it. I have a great relation. Bishop Rosado, Vinny was a good friend of mine, and he was younger than I am, but he was Vinny and I was Joe. We had a great relationship. I was 1 year I was president of the school board over there and things like that. But now I go. Of course, I go every Sunday. I sit in the same seat for 57 years. We've sat in the same pew in the same row, second row from the altar. We've sat there for 57 years, our family. So we still sit there. And I have a good relationship. One of the things that helped us here is shortly after we got here and got into the church and everything, back then there was a priest who was head of the retreat center down here, the Catholic Retreat Center. He started a program called Family Guild, because back then so many of the people were foreign had come in. You didn't have a big, heavy local barn group. And it was usually 10 to 12 families. And we all had a priest moderator from various places. Ours happened to be from St. Thomas High School. And once a month, we'd get together in one of the houses. And we'd have a little program that the moderator would talk about this or that church-wise. And then we'd have a little social afterwards, But the concept of this group was to be a family guild. If we had a problem, it so happened one of them was a lawyer, one was a doctor, a heart doctor, one was this, one was that. You always had this, and this helped Marianne too, because then it gave her a group of women and then she became part of the Charity Guild of Catholic Women, and that's a great organization here. I don't feel like I'm 70 anymore, but I feel active. I have the aches and pains, obviously, and I've got to watch myself. I don't, be careful, but that comes with experience. No, I don't feel. I feel I could go out on the pipeline and sell pipeline work right now, but so be it. I keep kidding my kids. I think I ought to be like President Bush. They always give me something for Christmas, something different. One year they gave me a ride in one of the Navy trainers down here down at Galveston, and I had flown in one of those trainers one time way back when, and then they've given me this and that. They give me things, and like Joy the other day said, "Dad, what do you want for Christmas?" I said, "I just want you all to be over here. That's all I'm interested in." She said, "Well, you're going to get a lot of junk." I said, "So be it." Oh, heck yes, I want them around. But I want them to be happy. I don't want to. I want them to feel that they don't owe me anything. But I'm there to help them. And if one of them comes up and says, "Hey, Dad, I need," or Grandpa, they don't call me Grandpa. They call me Papa. Papa, I need this or that. I'll do it if I can. But they watch over me too. Like Angela, my daughter in Austin. She comes in every month for a couple of days, and just to be around. We go to I right now as of now, every day I'm in Houston when I can. I take a fresh flower down to Mary Ann's grave, spend a little time with her every day of my life that I'm in Houston. when I can. I go down and take. Oh, we've had a heartache. Yeah, we lost my first son, Joseph L. We lost him in Washington. He's buried up there in Washington. I'm lucky enough. I never met him physically, but I'm through communication with the cemetery up there. I met a guy for the last 50 years. Every April the 1st and every December the 13th, death day and birthday, he puts a flower on my son's grave. I send him a check every year, to do it. As a matter of fact, he just called me and said, it's December the 13th. I said, I know, a check is in the mail to you. And he'll go there and he'll say a prayer. And he'll put the flowers, then he'll send me pictures of them. So I have them, yeah. My mom and dad, I try to go up there quite as much as I can. Joey and Carla, my other daughter here, about every year. Now, I don't know, now that my sister's dead, maybe we won't. But we usually try to go up there once a year, stop in Glen Carbon for a day, go to the grave, and do all the local stuff, and then go in to see my sister and spend a few days with her. Drive up. What are you going to do? What else is there? My kids were here. They took over. My kids took over. My girls, hell, they took over. They worry about me. I know. They always. Joy, the day goes by. If I'm not going to dinner, she doesn't call and say, how are you, Dad? Or what have you been doing? Or can I do anything? Or can I bring anything? No. And Carla, I see her every Sunday. I go to dinner with her every Sunday. So, yeah. No, I think just enjoy life and like people, and don't let all this hullabaloo take you. Just like I'm really not pleased the way the election goes. So be it. What the heck? It'll all work out. It all works out for the best. Life is a ball. Yeah. And just like I said in there, that I'm pretty sure I have my motto from Thucydides: collision at sea will ruin your entire day. Mailman. Yeah. Pepper's taking care of the mailman. And I became.
Hold on, let's wait for the puppy. You told us all about Pepper.
I can get him out of here if you want me.
It's all right. I think he'll calm down.
Pepper, no!
How long did you serve on the sailor? Well, hold on.
Pepper, shut up. Go in there. Get in your room.
Whoops.
Oops. I better let him out. He's happier if I let him out.
Okay. So you're good. Nothing else you want to add? You're good.
No, heck no, I don't. I think we've done everything that.
Well, funny thing is, with the 97 years, we can start over right now, and you can tell whole new stories.
Yeah.